Welcome to Speak with Purpose, a celebration of thought and influence, where bold ideas ignite action. Join Christine Gagnon and the TEDxCatawba community in shaping the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Gagnon, founder and organizer of TEDxCatawba. We're here today to introduce one of our esteemed speakers for our 2025 event to be held here in Hickory, North Carolina on June 14th at the Drendel Auditorium. I'm joined today by Blaise Agüera y Arcas. He is Vice President, Fellow, and CTO of Technology and Society at Google. He is a prominent AI researcher and author of 3 books, including Who Are We Now?, which I have behind me, as well as What is Intelligence, which will be released in September of this year. But we should also note that you've released the first part of your book, your upcoming book, which is out now and is entitled What is Life? So welcome, Blaise. Thank you so much for joining me on a Sunday especially.
Thanks so much, Christine. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So I would like to lead into this podcast to give people a flavor about who you are as a person. So I know you, I would say, not well, but somewhat well. And I think you're a very intellectually curious person, and that is just amazing. So where did that all start? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and where it all began?
I mean, that's a big question. But but basically, I grew up, so my parents were living in Mexico when I was young. So, I'm an American citizen, but we moved to Mexico when I was like 11 months old. And my father was Spanish, my mother is American. And so I grew up in Mexico City. And I think my very earliest memory from when I was 3 years old involved basically going through the entire house and picking up everything that I could carry that seemed electronic and bringing it back to my room. And I had just kind of learned how to write a little bit, and I wrote "Dangerous Experiments Do Not Enter," taped it to my door, and then began taking all of the things apart. And when I say like taking them apart, I mean like I began by trying to just like take covers off and so on, but like I was trying to figure out what was going on, because if you have a radio or something, it seems like magic, right? It seems like a magic artifact. And I opened it up and I saw these incredible things inside, circuit boards with components on them and stuff. And you're like, what's inside the components? So by the time I finished taking this apart, I had destroyed everything. and I remember just like sort of coming to almost as if out of a trance, after taking all of these things apart, and I had basically like a pile of rubble in my room, and I began to cry because I thought I am in really deep shit. and so I kind of like swept all of the things under my bed,
under the bed.
And I thought, like, surely if it's under the bed, like it's going to be
no one will notice.
It's going to be fine. No one will notice. And I took the sign down, and I just like go on with the day. And one of my sweetest memories still of my parents was when they found out what had happened. It must have been a couple of days later. I was so terrified, and they were just really kind. And they were like, okay, we'll take you to the junkyard. We'll bring things home for you to pick apart. Just don't take any more. I think I'd only spared the TV because it was like too heavy to move.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's so interesting. I love that story. So that was the beginning of it, then.
Yeah. I always liked taking things apart. I began programming, and using a computer also really young, like 6 years old. And
wow.
And yeah, my original thought was that I wanted to be a theoretical physicist because that's the deep stuff. That's like really figuring out the fundamentals about how the universe works. But after about halfway through, I would say, my undergraduate in physics, I realized that basically that I wanted to be a physicist in 1920, not a physicist in 2020.
Interesting.
And,
why do you say that?
Well, I mean, physics remains really interesting, but it's become so technical that you really have to specialize quite narrowly and sort of develop a tool, an extremely elaborate toolkit in order to be able to make real progress in basic physics. And I really liked the more tabletop, kind of like you can make progress and be a generalist at the same time kind of vibe of the physics of an earlier era. Also, for me, the most interesting problems now, actually had to do with things like the brain. And so, I kind of made this shift from physics into computational neuroscience for that reason.
That's an interesting pivot. Was there a moment where you were like, okay, I went to school for physics, I realize I'm going to pivot, and this is the moment that you did it?
Yes. I guess there were a couple of inciting events. One of them was that I was on academic probation because I'd been such a poor student. I'd got like 3 Ds in one semester at Princeton.
What? You're not a straight A student?
No, A's and D's, nothing in between, as far as I remember.
That's
I was
okay.
not a good student in university, and partly it was because I was always distracted by I would dive really deeply into the things that I was really into and then neglect other stuff, and had very poor executive function, and honestly still do. But anyway, I on the one hand, I realized, I'm really good with computers, and I've been sort of pushing that into the background because it's not serious, it's not real physics, and just sort of like acknowledging, okay, if I really am good at that, I should use it. And it's actually a wonderfully powerful telescope or microscope or instrument for doing all kinds of research and learning all sorts of things that are interesting and valuable. I should lean into it. And the other thing was beginning to work on computational neuroscience. My advisor for my undergraduate was Bill Bialik, who was a physicist turned computational neuroscientist, and I was really inspired by basically using the toolkit of physics to work on brains.
Wow, that is very interesting. So it kind of leads me into my next question. It's a very broad question, but we met at FT Weekend, was maybe the year before last year. Oh, gosh, time just flies by. But I was really impressed with your book, Who Are We Now? Because you have such a broad perspective. I guess I didn't expect that when I saw, okay, Google AI researcher, he's going to be here, he's going to be speaking. And then I read your book. I was like, wow, this is a very broad philosophical way of thinking. So I'd love to hear more about that, but more specifically, what inspired you to write that book? Because I remember you were on stage and you were like, oh my goodness, if I would have known how much work this would have been, right? It was a huge undertaking. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think we would never do half the things we do if we knew how much work
true.
they'd be, like having kids or So Who Are We Now is really a social science book. So it's on the surface pretty far outside my wheelhouse. But the two things that had been happening. So I began really serious work on it probably in 2016, and there were two things going on. One was the run up to the election, in which Trump made it into the White House for the first time, and the huge social divisions that I was sort of seeing at the time, and that led me to start to do a bunch of surveying using Amazon's Mechanical Turk at the time, which is this online platform that Amazon runs that lets you do surveys, send them out to lots of people. It's really for doing. I knew about it because of AI. Originally, it was designed to build training sets for training AI through human labelers, but you can use it for running surveys too.
And wait, did this start as an intellectually curious project, or were you intending on writing the book when you were kind of going through and gathering this data?
I was totally not intending on writing the book. I just wanted to know about people's beliefs and identities. I had the sense that human identity was at the core of a lot of those schisms, and I wanted to understand more, and especially to get a little bit outside the bubble of Seattle and my friends and so on, and understand some things about human identity from a broader demographic perspective. So that was the original stimulus. I didn't think I was going to write a book. No. The way I came to the book idea was that the results of those surveys, I began analyzing them. It was addictive. I started to spend real money on it because when you start to see data come back and analyze it, and you find big surprises in the data, you're like, is that true? Like, okay, let me ask another few thousand people and see. and after a while, the plots that I was generating with these things and so on, they all had these kind of big surprises in them that I thought more people should know. So originally it was a slide deck that was basically just a whole bunch of plots and a caption for each of them with like, here's the thing that is surprising. And then I realized, this really looks like a book, and I need more backstory in order to make for people to be able to make sense of some of those findings.
Wow, that is incredible. I absolutely love the book. So thank you for all that hard work. Now, let's talk about, because that's actually your second book. Let's talk a little bit about your third book. I mean, it seems like you released Who Are We Now, and then you went right into writing another book. Is that true?
Yes.
And
That's true.
why now? I'm assuming because now is the right time, but what then inspired you to step into this next journey with What is Intelligence?
Well, I am an AI researcher, first and foremost, and it's obviously a moment when huge things are happening in AI, and it's been a huge surprise to a lot of people, that AI has started to succeed in the ways that it is succeeding now, and I think that basically the success of AI and the success of the approach that we were taking to AI has told us a bunch of things about intelligence more broadly. There's always been there's a long history of computational neuroscience, meaning the study of the brain influencing AI. But I feel like now the tables have turned a little bit, and AI starts to influence neuroscience in the sense that, by building something, we have come to understand a lot more about not just the details of of how our brain works, which you can only figure out with with instruments and by doing real experiments on brains, but basically what the brain does. So understanding from a more functional perspective, like not just how do brains work, but what are they doing, I think has led to a bunch of really big insights. So I wanted to pull all those insights together, and that was what this book was really about.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. So I want to pivot slightly into maybe going back to you as a 3-year-old with the do not enter danger zone sign.
Yes.
So here you are, AI researcher, very, very successful. Can you tell us a little bit more? What are your passions and interests now outside of work? Or are you still taking apart, your TV and radios and things like that? Or what do you like to
No,
do in your spare time?
I've become really bad at hardware. It's I mean, there was a time when I did electronics, for real. But the thing about learning how to code is that you get results so quickly. It's quite addictive, So becoming a good programmer kind of took away a lot of the impetus to do experiments with hardware because it's just so much more quickly rewarding. Once you have a general purpose computer, you can program it to do anything, literally anything. Whereas building hardware, you can only get it to do one thing. So
That's true. Are
I-
you then coding in your spare time these days?
Christine, what spare time?
Actually, all my friends say that to me. Christine, what are you doing this weekend? I'm like, I think I'm working. When am I not working? I think there's this blurred line for me. I don't know if you feel the same way, but a lot of what I do is my passion. So there is no divide for me between work and non-work. It's just sort of life. Do you feel that way?
I very much feel that way, and I feel like that is a huge privilege. You and I are
I
really
agree.
lucky. Are really lucky to be able to do that.
I completely agree with you. I thank my lucky stars every day.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's especially lucky for me because of my very poor executive function. Like, if I had to go and do something 8 hours a day that didn't interest me, I'm just not sure that I wouldn't still be like, on probation.
I was going to say
in
you
some
might
way.
get D's, but in a
Yeah,
different way.
exactly.
I
Exactly.
feel the same, actually. I think I personally struggled, to be in the traditional office setting for 8, 10, 12 hours, just doing things that really didn't interest me. But now, especially with this TEDx and meeting people like yourself, I just feel this amazing privilege where I wake up every day and I'm doing something interesting. So I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
I
Back in 2014, David Graeber, who is a wonderful anthropologist, died a couple of years ago, very sadly. Wrote an essay called "Bullshit Jobs." I don't know if you've read
No,
it.
I have not. I'll have to check that out.
It's really good. And his thesis was that Keynes was right, that we'd all be working 20-hour work weeks by the year 2000 because of improvements in automation and so on. But we've basically made a wrong turn. Rather than just reclaiming that time, and doing whatever we want with it, we've invented more and more bullshit jobs, which are not real in the sense that, if you have a couple of drinks and you have a bullshit job, like, you will admit, yeah, the world would be just fine if I didn't go in today. But that's how we're paying each other. So
That's very interesting and
yeah,
true. I agree
yeah.
with you on that. So do you think we'll like right the ship then with all of our, I think progressive technologies?
Man, I really hope so, because there's a dark underside to this bullshit job story, which is shit jobs. So for Graeber,
Yes.
most jobs are either bullshit jobs or shit jobs, and the difference is that a shit job is one that actually somebody needs to do. Like, they're the ones that
Right.
when COVID hit, they're like, no, you're an essential worker, you have to go in, and those tend to be much worse paid. But that's like, teach at the kindergarten, drive the bus, be a janitor. Like, those are
Right.
still, like, somebody's got to do that stuff. And we don't honor them, and we don't respect them with a proper living wage. So unfortunately, we're in this bizarre situation where I think a lot of people, are either in that sort of essential work underclass, or
Right.
are doing things that they fundamentally know in their hearts are not valuable, but are getting paid pretty well to do it. So I think that's a bit of a sick situation.
Yeah, and I think, well, you bring up a good point because I think there's hope, right? There's hope that maybe the shit jobs will maybe find some automation. But I do think the bullshit jobs that you're talking about, a lot of people almost are defensive about that, right? Because they're like, wait, what? Of course you need me. What are you talking about?
Of
And
course.
I hope we can kind of break through that. We had talked a little bit about our perspectives on using AI to do research, and you had made an interesting comment that I had written down about your perspective on AI being viewed as tools. But I think you said, did I hear you wrong? That they're really like people. Can you
Yeah.
can you talk me through that? I just found that so interesting. I needed to sort of restate that for our audience. I love it.
I know that calling AIs people is a very provocative statement,
Yes, yes.
and I want to be cautious about doing it because normally when we say people, we're basically bundling together a whole bunch of things. Those include intellectual capabilities and things that we can do, but also how we need to be treated, human rights, civil rights, etc., and relationships, certain kinds of relationships with other people. So, I think one of the big challenges with AI is that it forces us to reconsider that bundling. Like, maybe all of those things don't go together. We seem to it having only two categories, right? Either something is a tool, which means it is fundamentally not intelligent, not able to act or have agency, and not real in the sense of anybody being home, if you like, or it's a person, which has all of the rights, responsibilities, relationships, duties,
It's very
etc.
binary.
It's very binary, right? And AI is forcing us to break that binary, which I think is part of why it's a big Copernican trauma, if you like.
Very interesting. So when we go into the direction of AI, one of your papers I read, you started to touch on general artificial intelligence, and I think that that's really interesting. Do you have a perspective on the direction that we're headed and some of the things that we should prepare for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably many of your listeners know about the term AGI, artificial general intelligence. I wrote a piece, again, a kind of a spicy take, I guess, a couple of years ago with a co-author, Peter Norvig, in which we made the case that artificial general intelligence is already here. AGI is already here, because a lot of the AI industry has been talking about, when we achieve AGI, when it will happen, maybe in the next 5 years, maybe never.
Right.
Although fewer people are saying never nowadays. But I think a little history is maybe useful here. So, why did we invent this term AGI? Well, it's because originally AI, ordinary AI, meant, having a robot that could do general stuff that you could have conversations with and so on. Like just think HAL 9000, or Robbie the robot or whatever. Like it's right. Intelligence is intelligence. Like why do we need to break it down further? But what happened was that we began to build special purpose systems based on neural nets that started to do real useful work in the 90s, like initially digit recognition, recognizing the digits 0 through 9, and then recognizing images of different kinds, or doing speech understanding, so it could decode audio into text, and a lot of people started to call that AI because it was in the tradition of cybernetics and artificial intelligence, but it's obviously not real AI. Like you can't have a conversation with a digit recognizer. It can't, let alone, it can't fold the laundry or whatever. So, that's where we started to talk about artificial narrow intelligence versus artificial general intelligence. Narrow intelligence meaning it's for a specific task and only does that. So that's why we made up that term, and we were making progress at artificial narrow intelligence for specific tasks. But then something really cool happened, which is the advent of autoregressive sequence models, which I know is a big term, but this is basically just next word prediction or next token prediction, and that started to happen in the 2010s. So we began to have systems that could do that at large scale for written language around 2019, and we kept making the models bigger and bigger. Originally, predicting the next word was just something that we were using. For instance, like my team at Google made the next word predictor, or helped make the next word predictor for Google's keyboard on Android phones. That
I see.
strip that you see that lets you kind of autocomplete words. Right. So it's useful if you're trying to make autocomplete for a keyboard. But we always thought, okay, this will be useful for speeding up typing, but it's never going to be artificial general intelligence. That doesn't make any sense. Like you can't just make a statistical next word predictor and expect it to be able to predict the next word when that next word would be like the answer to a complicated word problem, right? Or involve like actually understanding the whole story that came before. There's like a long story, let's say, about a bunch of people, and then the sentence is like, at this point Jen was feeling sort of, okay, predict the next word suddenly is not just statistics. That's like, you've got to understand the story and what Jen was feeling at this point, right? So the big shock was that when we started to build really big models that predict the next word, they began to predict the next word correctly, even when what came before was a really complicated word problem or story. And that was really when we realized that, or at least when I realized that artificial general intelligence is not actually a different process from predicting the next word. It's just a matter of doing it at really large scale.
I feel like we've just sort of hit the tip of the iceberg, if you will, but I don't know if that's me living in my bubble to say, okay, well, that's just me dreaming. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, we're at a really big moment. All of the ideas on Earth that have propelled human progress, that have I would say social intelligence, meaning the intelligence that humans collectively have, which is a big theme in the first book, Who Are We Now? That's all happened in human brains, and we're about to undergo this transition in which a lot of new ideas get hatched in machine brains, and the interaction.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So society, right? As far as like when we think about what human superintelligence, if you want to think about it that way, right? What that is has consisted of a network of humans, and it will now consist of a network of humans and AIs.
It's much more of a two-way street than we imagined it to be.
100%, which is why I resist just calling AIs tools, because when you start to think about networks of intelligences that collectively level us up, right? It's both kinds of nodes in that network.
That does soften the binary definition for sure. So we'll have, I think, people in our audience and our listeners that will have varying levels of understanding and comfort with artificial intelligence. One of my questions for you is, do you have advice to, say, a novice or someone who wants to become more familiar in this space, who maybe doesn't even know where to start? Obviously, your talk will be a part of that, but do you have any general advice?
Yeah. So just in terms of practical advice, I think Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence, which is,
I have that book. I love that book.
It's probably about a year old now. But I think it's really good in terms of practical advice. And, what I thought was so interesting about Ethan's book is that he begins it by saying, of course, AIs are not people, and of course they're not, it's just numbers going on inside there.
What are they?
Well, he doesn't say, but are they? He says, but if you want to actually, work with one successfully, then you've got to pretend they're people. You've got to treat it or interact with it as if it is, a highly intelligent but sometimes inept intern. And I think that's actually
Inept intern.
well, in some ways they're much more apt than a lot of interns.
Right.
But,
I'm sorry to have to say that. I might agree with that.
but the point is you have to actually use your theory of mind, meaning your don't just think of it as a Google search box or something, right? You have to think about it as having ideas, and like what does it know, what doesn't it know, and like have an interchange in which you interact with it as if it were a person. It's only by doing that you're going to get useful collaboration, right? And I think there's something quite profound about that.
That's great. That's great advice. So you're coming here to Hickory, North Carolina. I have to ask you, so all of our listeners can hear it as well, what compelled you to take the stage at TEDxCatawba?
Well, you did, Christine. I mean,
Oh, thank you so much. We are so excited. We cannot wait for you to be here. So I would like to maybe pivot a little bit into the talk, but I don't want to give away too much. If we were to say we want the audience to walk away with maybe one concept or theme or a couple of feelings from your talk, could you describe that?
Yeah, totally. So, Who Are We Now is about collective human flourishing, and about the fact that, the reason humanity has gotten more capable and that our lives have gotten better over time, which they have. Just try living in the year 1000 or 1500. I wish we could do that experiment, and you would know how much
maybe
better
for a day.
our lives are now.
Just
Yeah,
a
exactly. The reason things have gotten better is because of our increasing ability to cooperate and work together. And effectively, what we think of as human intelligence is really a collective kind of intelligence that comes from all of us working together, almost like the way a hive works. So, people talk about hives of bees or nests of ants as being superorganisms, right? Mm-hmm. Humans are a superorganism that way, and I think that what we have to understand is that we've gotten successful AI by training them on the language of billions of human beings online. That intelligence is collective human intelligence that we've imbued AI with. And as we start to interact more and more with AI, it's essentially extending this collective human intelligence with additional nodes that have themselves been trained on and with humans. So my point is that thinking about AI as an other, I think, is a mistake. In much the same way that a lot of our wars and conflicts with other humans, that have to begin by othering another population, are a mistake. We're not dealing with an alien invasion. We're literally dealing with ourselves, for a kind of ourselves that includes that's very capacious, right? That includes biological brains, non-biological brains, groups, small and large entities, and so on.
Interesting. Well, we cannot wait to have you here for our TEDx event. So Blaise, I want to thank you for joining us today. We are so honored to have you, and we will see you in June.
I'm really looking forward to being there. And thanks so much for having me on, Christine.
Thank you. To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week for another episode of Speak with Purpose to get insights into our speakers, sponsors, and partners for TEDxCatawba. You can also learn more about our independently organized TEDx event and purchase your tickets on our website, TEDxCatawba.com. We're also on social media. It's TEDxCatawba. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thank you so much and see you next week.